You've probably heard this story of the lion and the mouse 100 times, right? But what you might not know is how that one little story is a doorway into this huge, ancient world of storytelling, a world that took on a really special life of its own in Gujarati children's literature. So today, we're going to follow that mouse and see where he takes us. It all starts with this simple question. A tiny mouse and the king of the jungle. What could they possibly have to teach each other? It seems like a mismatch, but this question is the heart of one of the most famous fables ever told, and it asks some pretty big things about power, kindness, and, who really helps us when we're in a jam. Okay, so picture this. Deep in the forest, a huge lion is trying to take a nap. Suddenly, a little mouse scurries by and wakes him up. The lion, totally annoyed, traps the mouse under his giant paw. But the mouse promises that if the lion lets him go, he'll repay the favor someday. This is so ridiculous, so completely hilarious to the lion that he just laughs and lets the little guy go. Well, not long after, the tables are turned. That same mighty lion gets caught in a hunter's net. Now, all his strength, all his roaring, it means nothing. He's completely helpless, tangled up in these ropes. And then, who shows up? You guessed it, the little mouse he's spared. The mouse hears the lion's cries for help, rushes over, and starts chewing through the ropes with his tiny, sharp teeth. And just like that, the king of the jungle is freed by the smallest creature he'd ever met. That small act of kindness was repaid in a huge way. So where did a story like this even come from? Well, it's not just some random tale. It's actually part of a massive, ancient, global tradition of storytelling that uses animals to teach us some really important things about ourselves. Let's dig into those roots. First, let's just make sure we're on the same page. What is a fable? Basically, it's a short story, usually with talking animals or even plants, that's designed to teach you a moral lesson. They're meant to be simple, easy to remember, and just packed with a little bit of wisdom. And when you talk about the history of fables, two giant collections stand out that have influenced pretty much the whole world: the Panchatantra from the East and Aesop's Fables from the West. And what's really interesting is that they had slightly different goals. The Panchatantra from ancient India was almost like a how-to guide for future kings. It was all about teaching niti, which is this idea of the wise way to live, handle diplomacy, and rule a kingdom. Aesop's Fables from Greece, they were more for the everyday person. They taught practical, common-sense lessons and often used animals to make fun of human foolishness. Okay, so how did these huge global traditions find a brand new home and a new voice? Well, that's where we zoom in on Gujarati literature. Because here, these stories weren't just copied. They were totally transformed, and they sparked this incredible literary awakening for kids. You can see the first little seeds being planted way back in 1826, when Aesop's Fables were first translated into Gujarati. But the real explosion, the moment things really took off, was in the early 20th century. This is when a visionary educator and a whole movement started creating this massive library of children's books, not just translating the old stuff, but creating brand new stories for a new generation. And that visionary, the man at the center of it all, was Gijubai Badeka. He's known as the father of children's literature in Gujarati, and for good reason. He wasn't just a writer, he was a revolutionary who completely changed how people thought about education and kids' books. He was a real game changer. So, thanks to pioneers like Badeka, Gujarati children's literature just blossomed. It went way beyond fables and created this incredible universe of original stories and characters that, honestly, are still household names in Gujarat today. Let's meet some of these icons. First up, you have Mia Fusky. He's this wonderfully quirky, funny, and just lovable character created by Jivram Joshi. His crazy misadventures have been making kids laugh for generations. Then there's Bakwar Patel. He's a very clever and funny goat from a series of 30 beautifully illustrated books. He's one of those characters that feels so real, he practically jumps off the page. And, of course, you can't forget Gulbo Shial, the sly fox created by Ramanlal Soni. These character-driven stories were so important because they built entire worlds that kids could just get lost in. And it wasn't just character stories. I mean, the whole world of children's literature just opened up. You had beautiful poetry and rhymes, thrilling adventure novels, including translations of classics like Jules Verne. You had science fiction, biographies of inspiring historical figures, and even plays written just for kids. It was a whole literary ecosystem. So, with all this incredible literature being created, how did it survive? How did it get passed down from one generation to the next? Well, it wasn't by accident. A whole cultural ecosystem grew up around these stories to make sure they'd last. A huge part of this was children's magazines. Titles like Zagmag, Champak, and Bosandesh became absolute staples in so many homes. For a lot of kids, these magazines were the main fuel for their imagination, delivering a fresh batch of stories, poems, and comics every week or month. And this legacy is absolutely still alive today. The same stories that kids eagerly read in those magazines are now a core part of the school curriculum. The fable of the lion and the mouse, for example, is used to teach children about empathy, kindness, and how we can all help each other out in surprising ways. And that brings us right back to where we started. After taking this whole journey through history and literature, let's look at our little mouse and big lion one last time to really understand the message that's resonated for all these years. In Gujarati, the moral is often said like this: Nana mana nano jeev ban mota samay kaam aave. And what that means is even the smallest creature can be of great help in a big moment. It's such a simple, powerful way of summing it all up. At the end of the day, the message is pretty simple, but it's so profound. Kindness is never, ever wasted. And maybe even more importantly, no one, no matter how small they seem or what their status is, should ever be written off as insignificant. Everyone has something important to offer. So, from a tiny mouse in an ancient story to this whole universe of modern literature, you can really see the incredible power that children's stories hold. And it kind of makes you wonder, doesn't it? What are the seemingly small stories from your own culture that hold the biggest and most timeless wisdom?